Welcome to this section on the world religions, and we now are starting Buddhism. And Buddhism grew out of Hinduism, and so we'll move on into that. Let me share the screen with you here. Get started. Okay. Uh, Buddhism is one of the larger world religions, and it is worldwide in various ways, but more so in the Asia areas. You will see things like temples like this you know, around the world in different locations, but these are basically in Asia. You can see a video that's online, Introduction to Buddhism, for some additional information. When we talk about Buddhism, you see this wheel, which the rim indicates the endless cycle of rebirth, and the hub, the you see in here this symbol, moral self, discipline toward enlightenment is the idea there. The Dharma chakra, it's called the wheel of teaching here, and it's got the 8 spokes for the eightfold path there. So that's one of the symbols for Buddhism. You often see pictures of Buddhists sitting and meditating in a meditation position. Oftentimes, if you look at the hands, what the hands are doing are an indication of what this Buddha is representing about Buddhism. The lotus blossom also is part of it, and so you get these 8 spokes, and then your lotus blossom stands for purity, faithfulness, spiritual awakening. Just because this blossom kind of comes out or emerges out of ponds and muddy water and looks perfectly clean. So it's representation of purity, faithfulness, spiritual awakening. It's also known to symbolize the purity of speech, of the body, and of the mind, which are all part of the aspect of discipline in Buddhist meditation type of things. So there's your Buddha sitting, I mentioned a minute ago. Buddhism primarily, if you looked at a map, you'd find that it's a fairly limited area of the world as a whole, in parts of China and into Mongolia, and then you've got down here as well. So there's representations of it all over the world, but a little bit in the U.S., a little bit in Europe, and so forth. But primarily, the larger populations are in Asia. If you think about Buddhism as one of the larger religions, it's about 360 million, 6% of the world's population. It's the 5th largest world religion. There's, of course, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. Then somewhere right the same amount in Hinduism would you would call the non-affiliated, which would include atheists, which is about 6% of the world population. But the non-affiliates oftentimes have some kind of religious sense or spiritual aspect. They don't see the world as totally sacred, in other words. But in either case, Buddhism is down size-wise smaller than that. All right, so Buddhism is a religion of enlightenment, and you have the saying in Buddhism, I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. And those Buddha, of course, is the enlightened one. Gautama is the Buddha. It applies to, and it no, he was the first, but it applies to anyone who attains that enlightenment that he attained. And we'll get into that more when we look at the religion itself. Dharma is the teaching of Buddha, and so I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, the teachings, and Sangha. This is the creation of the community through Buddhist teaching and principles. So the Buddhist community, which is primarily the monks, and the people generally are the laity, don't take don't participate in the religions as meditation and so forth like the monks do, but they are to take care of the monks and to see that they're cared for by giving them offerings and so forth. And we'll talk about that too a little bit later. Why learn about Buddhism? A large part of the world's population follow Buddhism, and you may very well end up in an area. My son, one of my sons, the one pictured up there, ended up in a place that was 96% Theravada Buddhist, and got to know some people while he was there. But it helps to know something about their worldview and their religion. It opens up opportunities for dialogue, and helps us to understand various cultures better, because for some cultures, the Buddhist religion is what informs how they do a lot of things in their culture. Various Buddhist practices are popular in the U.S. You do have all kinds of Buddhist practices or semi-Buddhist practices or a mix of Buddhist practices with other things. Sometimes what people call Buddhist practice, you go, well, that doesn't totally look like Buddhist practice, but they do adhere to some aspects of it. And it allows for the exploration of connections between Buddhism and Christianity, and we'll note some of those connections later on. But primarily, we're going to start with the origins of Buddhism, and then we'll move into the religion of Buddhism, and then the tenets, its teachings, and then we'll talk shortly about the Buddhist worldview, and then have something a little bit said about Christianity and Buddhism. Interesting photo here of the Longmen grottos with the statues of Shakyamuni, Buddha, and his disciples here. Really incredible place. And there's a lot of incredible structures like the temples and carved Buddhas, all, just scattered around, and that are quite impressive to look at. And, indicates some of the history of that land and what they believed in. Buddhism was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who would become the Buddha, or we would say enlightened one, which is a term and not a personal name. The English word Buddhism appears in 1830, but does operate as an accurate depiction of the religion, so it's used widely, and I don't think Buddhists as a whole feel like that it's an inappropriate term for what it's describing. So let's move into the origin of Buddhism. I have noted some links and titles of some of the videos available on YouTube that are also available on the website for this course. It began in the 7th century BC, or in some books you see BC, before the Common Era. So sometimes you'll see me having that in some of these presentations, or depending on various things I might put up on here that I've gotten from other places. Buddha is a title signifying the enlightened one or the awakened one. Also, the name Shakyamuni, meaning the sage, is also part of it. And so this is the title given to Siddhartha Gautama, who was actually born in 563 BC and would die in 483 BC. So this is about the time in with the Jewish Christian um, period during the time of the Persians on into uh, to move on, and after that into the Greek period. The biography of his life, however, does not appear until several hundred years later. And so his he's said to have this was his last life. That's how he attained Buddha at this being his last life, because now he can be released from the cycle of reincarnation. But it lasted 500 reincarnations, is the tradition that goes with it from his biography of his life. Uh, so he was born into a wealthy family. The father was King Suddhodana, and so he was had a very privileged life. When he was born, there were some propitious signs accompanied with his birth. For example, a white elephant appeared to his mother, indicating he would be a great emperor or a holy man. Also, astrologers told his father same thing, that his son would be great. Um, and the tradition goes, his mother gave birth out of her side, and the world shook. And the tradition says that Gautama himself stated on his birth, "I am born for the salvation of the world. This is my last rebirth." So you get these stories of him, even though he did take place, was a real person at a real time. You get some of the interesting stories that go around with him hundreds of years later. And his father would protect him while he groomed him to be king, and he would, he really kept him insulated from the world as a whole, which had many issues in it, which is going to enter into his belief system and why he does some of the things he does as he becomes the founder of Buddhism. So he married at age 16 to Princess Yasodhara, and at age 29, his life of luxury really gets tested. And so his father, as we said earlier, was trying to protect him from all the things out there in the world. I don't know how. I guess if you're rich enough, you could maybe do that. But the father allows him to take a chariot ride, but decrees that all the poor, the suffering be hidden. However, the gods assume human form, so he sees an old man near death, a man disfigured by disease, a funeral procession of a decomposing body, and a monk who has renounced the world. So this biography of his life, notes. And so this has a profound impact on him. And now you remember he lives in a Hindu culture, and there's already the idea of having a holy man, being a holy man and withdrawing from the world and things like that. So he decides to forsake his status and wealth and seeks the meaning of life at age 30. And according to Vedantic tradition, in other words, the Hindu tradition of, withdrawing from life to meditate and try to get out of the cycle of reincarnation. His first quest for enlightenment, he was under the mentoring of two Brahmin hermits, Alara, Udaka. They were unable to tell him how to put an end to the cycle of rebirth, so he just felt like they weren't really giving him the answers that he needed to get out of the cycle of what he'll later indicate as the cycle of suffering. So he goes on a second quest for enlightenment. This is a quest where he practices asceticism and strict asceticism. And he had 5 companions with him, but decided that, just abusing your body, depriving your body, what called self-mortification, did not help at all to lead to self-realization, but only enfeebled the body and the mind. So he doesn't think that kind of asceticism is the answer to getting through out of the cycle of reincarnation. So to attain enlightenment, he ended up devoting himself to a simple life of intense mental discipline. That's where you have all that meditation. And if you do it well enough, you can get out of the cycle. So after prolonged meditation of 7 years while sitting under the Bodhi tree, he received the answer to his quest, which was called the middle path. And we'll talk about this later on. And he becomes Buddha, the enlightened one, or Tathagata, the one who has gone to enlightenment. And so that's another title of honor for Buddha. But he postpones his release. In other words, now he can get released out of the cycle of samsara. So if he dies, he leaves this world for nirvana, which is basically you cease to exist in Buddhist doctrine. But he decides to postpone this, and we'll talk about what this means a little bit later as well. But so he can teach others how they can accomplish what he accomplished, finding enlightenment. And so he becomes this great teacher to gain more disciples that will try to find that enlightenment like he did. So he starts with 5 converts, followers, and family. There is a legend at one point he ascends into heaven when he dies, but actually history indicates he actually died from eating spoiled pork given as an offering. You know, remember that monks, they get their food from people giving them different offerings there. The Buddhists say that words cannot truly describe Prince Gautama's enlightenment. It's something that really just can't hardly be described with words. And I give you a link to a Buddhist enlightenment, the place where he was, the Bodhi tree. It's near a temple, and you can see it to this day. At least that's ostensibly like it. You have the collection of the teachings, and then Buddhism will split into mainly there'll be the original Theravada Buddhism and then Mahayana Buddhism, which will have a whole lot of other branches. But the first council of followers, shortly after his death in 43, collected his teachings called the Triptaka, meaning 3 baskets. And then the second council in 380 BC, some argued for a greater role for the laity, less strict discipline, which, in Theravada Buddhism, it really, laity can't really practice this and make a living. I mean, it's just nearly impossible. And so there were those saying, well, this religion is only for the monks, really. And so there will be this split between Theravada and what will be known as Mahayana Buddhism around 200 BC. And then you have a fourth council about 1st century BC. This would be the first time sutras or scriptures are written down in the Pali language, which becomes known as the Pali Canon. And so you can see how much later some of the collection of teachings were. The Tripitaka, literally meaning 3 baskets, it has the Vinaya Pitaka. These are the monastic rules basket. And then you got the Sutta Pitaka, the words of the Buddha basket. And then Abhidhamma Pitaka, the higher teaching basket for the monks. So that's why you have it called the three baskets. You get different types of teaching in those baskets. And scriptures have been added over the centuries as well. And we'll end here with this map of just showing the spread of Buddhism. So you see in India, Buddhism here is the region during the 5th and 6th centuries BCE. Then it spreads to all these various areas in places like Cambodia today, 96% Buddhist, others less so, but it just gives you sort of an indicator. And so we're going to, in the first video here, it makes for an easy breaking point, and we're going to get into the religion of Buddhism more in the second video. And so I'll leave you here, and we'll pick up in video 2 on the Buddhism religion.